Knowledge is power. Make an impact by learning more, or hire us to do it for you. Let us focus on what we do best so you can stay focused on what you do best. Find all of our options under services, one-to-one training, subscription-based training, or accounting and business consulting. Going live. Talk amongst yourselves. We'll be back in 20 minutes.
20 minutes to go live. Sounds like the old Google Hangout days.
Seriously. Seriously.
Hey, Seth, I think I should. I think I have you sign up for my Zooming class. We'll teach you to make that like 5 minutes.
Oh, yeah?
Matt's been putting out a lot of good videos on how to use Zoom and all the little intricate things in it.
You know what I want to do, just to be an idiot? I'm gonna do a new video on how to write an email.
That would be cool. Did you guys know that?
No, I'm sorry. I want you to do how to Google something.
How to Google something. Well, that's actually a really good idea, because then I could feature the site. Let me Google that for you. Have you ever used that? That's hilarious.
Yes. Mariette was the one that told us about that.
Yep, and of course I'm getting the grindy wheelie thing on Facebook. See, this is what I mean. It's no tutorial can solve this problem. I'm going to show you. So last time this happened, I had to clear my cache. So it's like da-dum, 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 da-dum. So clearing my cache always solves this problem. So that's what I'm going to do, which is annoying because then I get logged out of absolutely everything.
Did you guys know that the Zoom phone app changed?
It did?
No.
How did it change?
I recently noticed when I was trying to get logged in, it's got a new look to it. Maybe I was just blind to it. But so for one cool aspect of it, in my car, I have Apple CarPlay. And thanks to Apple CarPlay, I can use Zoom to where not watch anything, but I can dial into a Zoom call, listen, and they even have a special like large button you can push. So if you're safe driving mode, you're driving, Mariette, this is for you. You can hit the button, it clicks it over to where you can talk, and then it's got a big button again to click it to turn off. So it's like a super easy mute.
Nice.
You can even share your screen on your phone as well, which I plan to do some interesting phone app demos doing that instead of having to mirror it a different way.
I think I've seen Mariette doing it, or maybe she does. Maybe she's mirrors it a different way. Using.
Yep. See, now it worked once I cleared my cache.
I'm not sure. We'll have to ask her, Greg. How she does.
The reason I made that joke about doing a video on how to like write emails is because I do see some videos out there for people that I'm kind of like, really? You thought we needed a video on that? Although I've been guilty of the same thing, so I should keep my mouth shut.
You know, the things that we know and take for granted are just not the same as the people out there in the real world.
So
I know.
You say common sense is not common.
Common sense is uncommon sense.
I always say it's really easy to forget what you had to learn.
Absolutely.
That's very That's very deep, Matthew.
Thank you.
Stop being so deep on our show.
With your cool shades on. Future's so bright, you have to wear shades.
That's right.
I like
So I think we're almost there. I just have to now figure out how to share this to the group. There it is, share. Look at that. There's actually a share button today. Sharing.
Well, I do believe that there were updates all the way around with Zoom, little things like that, and what Matt said.
Well, this is Facebook's nonsense, I think.
Oh, Facebook's updated too. I've actually gone in and re-looked at all of my security and who shares what with what all over again. You should, I mean, it takes some time to do it and go through each one, but it's so very worthwhile to do that.
I agree.
We are. All right. Hey, guys, guess what? I have good news.
We're live.
We're live on Facebook and in Zoom and somewhere in this universe on a planet, I think.
In the nerdosphere.
It looks like a big blue marble. And welcome to Pivot Tables Gone Wild. I'm going to let a few more people in. Letting people in. Ooh, here comes Jesse. Here comes Gleet. Every once in a while, I see Jesse puts his name up in places, and it just says Gleet, and it reminds me of Groot. Jesse, I want to hear you say it. Unmute, and I want you to say, "I am Gleet."
I am Gleet.
Hey, Seth, apparently Linda has a problem with your outfit, huh?
What's wrong with my outfit?
She's telling you never to wear that when you guys hang out. Tiffany!
Never to wear what?
Your outfit, man. I mean, like, geez.
My shirt?
Yeah, well, never
I
mind.
don't think she was talking about Seth.
Good morning to all these people here.
Good morning. I'm looking at people join us live. Gina, you're here with us.
Join us. Where are you?
And live on Facebook. And see, now that I had to clear my cache, every 5 seconds, Facebook is going to ask me to allow it to track my location. It wants my account and routing number and social security number so they can take all my money.
And your firstborn child.
Yep.
I just did that yesterday because on our Zoom call, my computer just drug down to absolutely nothing, and so I cleared all that fun stuff, and it started performing quite a bit better. But yeah, it's annoying that you got to keep answering. Yeah, I do want you to see where I am and who I'm looking at and all that fun stuff.
You know what I figured out? It does a really good job of improving performance. New computer.
That's on the
So much better. I was actually at the point of like I was getting ready to just format my hard drive. And I just hate doing that, although it's gotten so much better because everything's really in the cloud now. So it's not the recovery period from reformatting a hard drive is a lot better than it used to take me like 3 days until everything was back to being installed and downloaded and whatever. Now I can do it pretty much within a day, but it's still a pain in the neck.
Yeah, I can do it in about 4 to 6 hours, and that was actually my plan. If I was going to be taking the train down to meet with you guys next week, that's what I was going to do on the.
And are you taking the train down or no?
I'm not. I'm going to fly down.
Oh, you're flying. I was going to say, are we canceling next week? Did I miss a memo?
No, but we should probably fill the rest of the people here in on the memo.
No, we're not telling anyone. It's a secret.
This is our secret society.
Yep, the accounting skulls. Something like that. No, we're a bunch of us are meeting here at the Huntington Library, and we're going to work there for the day. It's a beautiful place to go work. Katrina, you should take a drive up and join us. And we're going to work there. It's a beautiful. It is beautiful environs in which to work.
So you're not limiting that to 97 and up?
Well, technically it was, but Matthew just opened up the invitation to everybody.
I like to include everybody. I'm sorry.
I love it. So what time and what day?
10 o'clock Friday, April 1st, April 4th.
No. February.
No?
Fool's Day.
I said April. I meant February. Why are you trying to get ahead?
And here's the better part. That's Pacific Standard Time. So if you're not there and you can't join in, please, in your own time zone, own area, feel free to do it with other people. And let us know. Like, it's all about getting together, collaborating, have a good time.
Yeah, so find a park of your own. Get your own park, and then we can stream live together.
Get your own park.
Get your own park.
Now that I spilled the beans, I may not be let in. So
That's going to be my video later today. Get your own park. This is mine.
So you'll be doing your Zoom from there?
No, because it doesn't open till 10 o'clock. So we'll do the Zoom first, then I got to race over there.
I don't even land until like 8:30 or something.
Yeah.
I bet we might be like, I know a guy that might show up that might be able to help do some kind of live streaming stuff while we're there. Mevo.
Cool.
If you want.
Meanwhile, back at the Nerd Cave.
No.
We had a very special event planned for you today, and I plan to do it. We are talking pivot tables gone wild. So with all the push, we got a whole one person uploading a spreadsheet.
I wonder if I know who that is then.
It was Tiffany.
So, and Matthew and I each kind of prepared our own, stuff. And then if you stick around till the end, we have something we want to share with you that we're going to do just for you by way of kind of a follow-up on this. So you got to stick around to the end to have it, which means we will have to end on time so that we don't hold people hostage. With that in mind, we wanted to show you pivot tables. I think it's timely this time of year. A lot of us are doing like cleanup jobs and things, which means we need to be able to gather and manipulate data to get it into various forums so that we can import it or just clean it and code it and whatever it is we need to do with it. The situation arises probably more often now than any other time of year where these kinds of skills become not just useful but indispensable.
Real quickly, can I see a show of hands of how many people here have used or do use pivot tables regularly? Cool. How many people have ever tried them and just got frustrated with them? Cool. Okay. This helps us to better understand, like one of the things I'm hoping to kind of cover through part of the time that I'm doing stuff is some of the reasons why pivot tables fail. Because it's kind of important to know the structure of the data will make it work or not work. So, sound good?
Sounds terrible. No, for the longest time, I used to think pivot tables were like this thing that only like Excel gurus who had been using Excel for 600 years could, really do effectively. And I'll never forget when I started to learn them and I realized it was much easier than I actually thought. I remember working for a client and we were interviewing somebody who, the job required Excel skills. It wasn't an accounting job, but it was a database management kind of thing where they were going to need to be able to export reports and cut up data quickly. And so Excel skills were definitely one of the big requirements, and that was very much made clear in the ad to hire. So when I'm interviewing the person, and the person comes in and they had said in their cover letter and whatever that they were expert with Excel. And, so we got to that part of the interview and I was like, okay, so pivot tables, right? And I got that like deer in the headlights look. They were like, I didn't know I had to be that advanced. It's like, when you think of advanced skills in Excel, you think of pivot tables. But I think and hope, and I've demonstrated this on Zooms in the past, not quite the way we're going to do today. I think when you see the stuff that Matthew and I have prepared for today, I think you are actually, even those of you who have seen me do this kind of stuff before, I think you're going to be blown away by what we're going to show you that you can do. But most importantly, how easy it is. Because the truth is, without even sharing my screen or showing you anything, it's if you think of it like this, and it might help to sort of start with this as your foundation. You're looking at a spreadsheet. Step number one is always we need it in a flat file format. What do I mean by a flat file? I mean, it is linear. It has rows and columns, and that's it, right? I can't have like merged cells, and the raw data can't be formatted to look pretty. It needs to be formatted to be functional, which means I have just rows and columns, right? My columns are my fields, talking in database language, and my rows are my records, right? So if you think of like a check register, my fields are things like the date, the payee, the memo. The record is the actual information that goes into those fields, the actual person's name, the actual date, and so on and so forth, right? So we need a flat file, just rows and records. A lot of times we're going to pull something like a CSV file. I'm going to show you an example of a CSV file I pulled, and it's actually an entire year's worth of banking. It's all of 2017 banking from this one bank account. And I wanted to give you that as a very real use case where you might be looking at cleaning up a company's books, and you can pull a CSV from their bank account for the entire year and then code the whole thing and very easily and quickly prep it for import into a QuickBooks file, right? So that I'm going to give you that as one of the examples we're going to show you. But at the foundation, again, we have rows and columns, right? So you think of those columns as your fields, the different pieces of information that's being described in each record. And when it comes to pivot tables, all we're doing is we're taking those fields and deciding how we want to present the information in those fields. What do we want to see in the columns, and what do we want to see in the rows? And the beautiful thing about pivot tables is with a simple click and drag, I can change my mind. I can say, hey, no, let's try putting this in the columns and see what that looks like. And I can put things underneath other things to easily and quickly group them and create a logic in terms of how I want that data presented. So if you can think of that as the foundation of what we're doing and how and why, then I think once you see it, it's going to make a lot more sense if you have been overwhelmed by it. And so think about that. And you have when you're setting up a pivot table, there's 4 quadrants, right? The main 3 are the rows and the columns, and then, of course, the values. A pivot table has to describe something with a numeric value in it, right? So you have rows and columns and values, and then the 4th quadrant is where you can take one of those fields and put it in a filter quadrant where its only function is to use it to filter what information is being displayed. So maybe I only want to see certain months, or maybe I only want to see a certain kind of data. In Greg's example, we're going to be looking at a situation where he's trying to compile data to calculate workers' compensation very quickly, where he wants to just be able to drop data into the table. And with the pivot table, once you drop the data into the raw table, you click a refresh button and boom, it's right there. Everything's calculated instantly and laid out however he wants, right?
Do you want to show them, or you want to go first? And
you go first.
You sure?
First. Yeah.
Okay. You can keep talking I'm going to just share so people can see some of the stuff that.
So Matthew and I we gutted out the data, so there's no proprietary names. We actually put names that are going to be familiar to a lot of you in place of them. Matthew did that. So Matthew and I have each kind of taken a stab at a different way of laying out what Greg is trying to accomplish.
All right. So this is not the one I wanted. Let's see here.
Yeah, I was going to say, that doesn't look familiar.
Yeah, trying to have Facebook up on the other side, so we can answer questions at the same time. Took a totally blind shot at some of this stuff as to specifically what Greg was looking for. So Greg, I will definitely appreciate maybe some insights if we need to twist and turn some stuff. Starting off, raw data. One of the most important things when you're dealing with pivot tables, especially if you want to deal with anything that has to do with like time, so like transaction dates, it's really important that your table does not have any missing rows. You have to have data in every single one of them. By doing that, it actually gives you the ability that you can do better breakouts of like dates and such. Now, this specific data was doing the same thing here with date here. And let me see if I can get this a little larger and squeezed over. So the problem that
you'll see with the date is that they call it military Zulu time or something like that. And so I had to convert that over to...
I'm going to show you a different way, Greg, because I saw that you had done that, and I saw that you wrote a very complex formula here to pull the date out of what was over there.
Yeah, that only took me 4 or 5 hours.
Yeah, using a text to columns command, you can get it done in a minute.
So is there an easy way to take out, say, I had downloaded from Amex and it had MON in the date. And when I changed the date format, the MON stayed.
Yeah, in fact, Laura, you had asked that in Facebook a couple weeks ago, and I answered it specifically in our Zoom. Did you not catch that? I guess you missed that memo.
Either way, we can. So basically, a good example would be, see, we've got the TXN date here. We've got the Z at the end. So same kind of concept. If you actually grab and highlight all the area you want, you can come up and do a find and replace. And if you want to just get rid of that Z, you could be very careful how you do this, because if I did just a Z and it was like a word, you could get rid of the wrong stuff. So you could go find what Z, replace with, leave it blank, and go replace all. Gone.
Right. Now, Matthew, do me a favor. While we're here, click OK, close this, and then Control Z to get it back to the way it was.
Yeah.
Here's what I did when I worked on my version of this yesterday, because I saw Greg had written that formula, and the problem with writing that formula is even as the dates are pulled in, it's not recognizing the years as years. It's not recognizing it in true date format. So do me a favor, highlight just the data in the transaction date column. I'll show you what I did the other day. Because if you notice, the dates do line up perfectly in terms of where the cutoff is from the end of the date and the beginning of what seems to consistently start with the letter T. So let's go data, and then let's go text to columns, and do fixed with next. You already see where I'm going, right? So click right in between the end of the date and where the T appears. Click next. Select the right side and choose Do Not Import, and click Finish.
I never do it that way.
Bam.
Nice.
Now Control on the number 1 for a quick format cells.
Control and the number 1.
Yeah, little keyboard shortcut tip. And let's get that in proper double-digit date form. So it's the second to last one that's visible, 03, 14, 12, and click OK. And this way everything kind of lines up. And the fact that it did the date format also confirms that you have this properly formatted like a date. So when I did this, I actually used this field after having cut it up this way, and it recognizes it beautifully as dates instead of using the date field that Greg tried to pull, which, like he said, took 4 hours to write the formula. This, when you're not even explaining it, takes less than 60 seconds.
So I'm going to admit I just got schooled on some stuff, which is awesome. And I always love that because I get to learn. So
that's okay. I learned a lot watching your version of the spreadsheet last night, which is why I was up till 1:30 in the morning. So we're even.
The reason this stuff is important, we're actually not going off on a tangent. It's important because the quality of your data is going to determine what you're actually able to get out of it, of course.
Yes.
And one of the reasons I focused on date right away is because I like to do some cool stuff where you can do like sliders, or really to where you can break down the periods. Here I was doing it by month, right? I can only do that if I have good quality dates, and you know you've got good dates when you can click on your drop down and you're seeing them like this.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it will consider every single day a different like column, and you get a really long sheet.
That was exactly the problem that I was having.
Okay. Well, see, we've already hopefully helped part of this.
I feel we're like the helpful Honda people for Excel spreadsheets.
Yeah, pretty much. But we're not going to buy you a car. Sorry.
Yeah.
So being that this was a workers' comp report, I figured I was trying to decide, okay, well, gosh darn it, how do I want to make this report look of what's the important part of it all, right?
Now, by the way, let me stop you there for a second and remind everybody, especially if you're in the Facebook live feed, and remember we're watching Matthew's version, and then when Matthew's done presenting, I'm going to show you my version of what I did on the very same thing, which kind of underscores that there's many ways to, I hate this expression, but many ways to cat, right? Anyway, so if you like what Matthew's doing, put hashtag Team Matthew in the comments in the live Facebook feed.
Like it.
So far, I'm Team Matthew, but I haven't seen Team Seth's.
But that's okay. Just put Team Matthew down right now. I mean, everybody.
Yeah, and then when I go, if you like what I'm doing, you can put Team Seth, and we'll just add them up. Whoever gets more Team Matthews or Team Seths wins.
And then actually when Seth shows his, just put Team Matthew also, and I'll translate it for him. So that way it's all good. So anyways, the important things, as you're looking at pivot tables here, the scary concepts is all the information that shows up on the side here. A lot of people probably are already familiar that you can click off a box, right? And it's going to go into one of the different fields. I can move it from values because I don't really want that, and I can move it to rows, which, depending on how you structure some stuff, can actually add on a whole new column to provide you more insight. Now, everything I just said there is a lot of information compressed into a small little bit, so I'm going to slow down a little bit and try to provide more context to it, okay? There are some aspects of creating a pivot table which are really cool, such as when you create the first bit of it, if you go up to design, you can actually come in and choose on how some of the layout works.
Yep.
I personally always like to do it in tabular form because there are certain times what I'll actually do is use this just to get my data structured in the rows I need, and then I'll copy it all, paste it into a new sheet, and now I have a new table of information organized the way I want. So if I go to show in compact form, and sorry guys, I'm making it smaller so you can see more of the structure and the look of it, you can start to change how everything will appear. You can choose whether you want subtotals or not. So if I go outline form is where you're getting more of this non-repeating titles. It's very sparse across everything. That's why I like to do this tabular form, because I like it just nice and clean. And you can also choose whether you want subtotals on everything or not.
Yeah, and for some reason, by the way, it often defaults with those subtotals at the top of a group, which I don't know why. I hate that. So I always change that to show subtotals at the bottom.
Yes.
But I'm guessing somebody somewhere actually prefers them on top.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know if you may have noticed what I just did, but I'm in a specific column, and by clicking at the total, it actually highlighted all the total rows in that sense. So one of the things you can do is I could actually come in and change a color on it to make it a little bit more visible if you needed to. But I don't want those there. So I'm going to say, do not show the subtotals. We'll shrink it down a bit. If you need to do subtotals on just a specific area, so you don't have tons of subtotals everywhere, like for sure, we're going to probably want to do a subtotal on our class, right? If I get to where my arrow is showing up on the column I wanted, you can actually come in, and if you right click, you can do subtotal, and it will only do that one column. So now you can start to really play with where do you want that total information popping up to get the best information out of it. That making sense so far, everybody? Any kind of questions on it?
Yep. And while you're on that subject, if you go over to the field as it's laid out in the pivot table dialog there on the right, and go to WC class, for example, under rows, right? Not in the field list, but where you have it in the
Here.
No. That's the slicer. Go back to the pivot table, all the way to the right where you have the quadrants there. If you click that drop down and choose field settings, you also get a much more detailed dialog with a lot of the same options. If you go to layout and print, over here you see how you can tell it here also to show it in tabular or above, show it in outline form. And once you select outline form, you can, by default, it's checked off to show subtotals at the top. If you uncheck that, it puts subtotals at the bottom. So in here, what Matthew was just showing everybody, which is in the ribbon, is super cool and super quick. I actually discovered that much later. This is how I used to do it. This is still important to know that it's here, though, because here you have a little bit more detailed access. So if you go back to the Subtotals and Filters tab, right, here you can even tell it to automatically subtotal, or you can custom and you can subtotal. You'll see in mine, I use the average in one case, and here click number format.
I was going there.
And now you can tell it to format whatever number is in that field, however you set it up here.
So this is a very, I'm going to hit cancel on purpose. This is a very, very important thing. By doing this, so I had a pay rate here, right? With what Seth is talking about, it actually is a lot easier to come down to this field at the bottom. Again, sorry guys, I'm sure this is small on your side, but I can come in, I can go to value field settings, and I can choose, do I want to sum? Do I want to count? Do I want to average? The difference is, of course, being like normal Excel, if you want to sum the total amounts together, you would do that. This is a pay rate, so I do an average.
Yep, that's exactly what I did for the same thing.
Everything.
Yep.
And then the number format is awesome. I like the accounting format because if there's not something there, it will give you, it doesn't muddy up your information.
Yeah. Another thing that's important about this specifically is if you can select the numbers in the column as Matthew has done, and you can just go into the ribbon and use the formatting options that are there. But the second you make any changes to the pivot table, it reverts back. If you do the formatting this way, it sticks.
Yep. So that really helps a lot. Now, I've also, like we saw, we were able to go in, and because we had the dates in the way we did, you can actually create custom groups, which is how we got the top area here. Seth is a little more familiar with how to change it along the top that way. But you can make your own, whether it's year, quarter, so forth. Now, what I've done at the top here is what they call like sliders, okay? You've got the ability, if I want to do just only see this one code, I can create these boxes like this where it'll only show me the one I click on, or I can actually click multiples. So think of how that could be pretty powerful if you did expenses. You could actually have a whole pivot table. I created one before that's kind of like a profit and loss, and you could be selecting off with a client or making a dashboard of information using a slider in this nature.
Yeah, a slicer is what it's called actually. And it's like a quick filter, which is so cool.
Then the other one, So this one you can do date ranges on. So I can choose if I only want certain months of time, I can make it longer or shorter, which it's the same idea as coming into here and editing it this way.
But much easier and more visual.
That's the key. That's the key to it. Because we all like to visually see what we're impacting.
And where this is important, I want to mention, since everyone here who's watching is an accountant, for us, it's probably easier, just as easy to do the technical, date drop down. But remember that a lot of times you're doing this to present it to a client and give the client a tool that they can play with. That's where this kind of stuff becomes really important, is you're making it, you're setting it up in a way that you can present it to a client and let the client play with it. And this is where you can add a ton of value for a client. Imagine giving this to a client and saying, yeah, just click on the appropriate workers' comp class so you can see what the workers' comp costs are for that particular month, and change the month on the slider so you can see for one class what the costs are each month, one at a time. Yep.
So Greg, real quickly, what I basically was trying to do here, and you can tell us if we got close or not, by setting the pivot table the way we did, we've got all of it by the different workers' comp classes. I added in a little extra because I saw that the item reference name from your table appeared to me like the different job titles that were going to be falling under those classes. And then figuring you needed to report by person, that's where we then have a breakout. The cool thing is, if I want to come in and if I feel I need to change this, I'm going to take my employee name. I'm just going to move this up and watch what happens. Now we're changing and we're putting everything specific under the person. Of course, that subtotal gets in our way, so let's get rid of that. But now I can see, for me, apparently I'm good at plumbing, tile, and I'm definitely good at paid holiday. So you can start to control the order that you need these things.
So can we put we're going to put the employee name at the top of the columns then?
Okay. Before I do that, Seth, is that the order you did yours?
No, I did mine. I like I said earlier, I took a very different approach to my layout because I saw yours and I said, I really just want to show something different so people can see, how flexible this really is, and the fact that there's no right or wrong, but lots of choices for how you can lay something out. And sometimes I think that's what confuses and overwhelms people, but it shouldn't. Think of it more as an opportunity to really play with how you want the data presented to figure out what's the best way.
Right, and that's what this is panning out for me, to see many different ways, like we said, of skin in the same skin.
So Matthew, do you want to let me share my screen so I can sort of catch people up to this point in mine?
Yes, I'm going to do one last thing and show the way I did the slicer is by going into this column, right-clicking, and then you can click Add Slicer.
Oh, good. I did mine differently.
Then let's do this. And on to you.
Okay, my turn. So everything that you've seen so far is pretty much what I would have gone over. But as you're going to see now, my layout is very different than Matthew's. I decided, kind of just for the heck of it, because I saw how Matthew did it, I said, what if, because with the timeline being what it is, it goes way far out to the right, what if I wanted to put the months in the columns here? So that's what I did. In my pivot table, I have the months in the columns, and you can resize the pivot table fields here, right? And so this is where I was saying earlier that I look at this as quadrants, because depending on how you've resized this, it will show it like this, usually by default, where I have the quadrants. Top left is filters, top right is columns. Over here, bottom left is what I want in my rows. Bottom right is where my values are, right? And so what I've done here is, for a specific month, I have it by employee, and within that by the item type, right?
Nice.
I thought I had the workers' comp code in here. I may have taken it out because I think ultimately I said, you know what, this is what I really care about. This is kind of what I think drives the workers' comp rate. The code refers to this ultimately. So here you can see within a month, each employee and what categories they may have worked in, right? And so for Mariette, for example, she's got a lot of hats that she wears, right? And then within each of those, here's the workers' comp rate, the total hours, the pay rate. And like Matthew pointed out, I had the same thing. It's funny, when I first did this, I had the pay rate because the default is a sum. And I was getting these crazy, and I was checking the math and it wasn't working. And then I realized, oh crap, I've got to do this as an average so that I get the actual rate and not a sum of all the rates added up. So these are the kinds of traps you'll run into. Now, the other thing I noticed is Matt's slicer was really cool, how it had everything laid out like in all these columns. And this is the default view. And by the way I did mine is when you're in the pivot table and you go to Analyze, Insert Slicer. And you'll see that a lot with this kind of stuff, that there's a lot of different ways to access the same thing. And it doesn't really make a difference. It's more about where your head's at and where you think to go when you need to do something, right? Matthew, accessed it right off of here, right? Add as a slicer. So again, lots of ways to do the same thing. So I was looking at Matthew's, I was like, how did he get his to look so cool the way it was laid out instead of this one long column? And so eventually because I know how to play around with these things, I just right-clicked on here. And I got this dialog here where it says Size and Properties. And this is where we get a little deep into this. But up here, you'll see now Position and Layout, Number of Columns. Right? So I just made it 4 columns. And now I can drag it out to the right to make a little more space. And boom, now my slicer is every bit as sexy as Matthew's was, right?
Hey, Seth, do one thing real quick. Go back and click on it again, right-click.
Uh-huh.
Got one more thing. Go to Slicer Settings at the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
You can actually rename it also. So if you want to, again, thinking
Which
of that.
I did here, by the way, because it's not by default called classifications.
Okay. So you can change the order of them. You can hide certain ones. So if there's no data, they won't show up, which is neat.
Yeah.
And this is all based on that idea, again, if you're going to give this to a client, that business owner, getting them the data they actually need, not all the fluff around it.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Thank you.
Now, while we're at it, you have 2 options here. Up here, what this little guy means is you can choose whether or not you allow multi-select, right? So if I click on one of these, right now it's just showing me removal. If I go to click on travel, it's only showing me travel. It effectively deselects removal. So if I want to multi-select, I just click this guy right here, and now I can see both removal and travel. See that? And then if I want to just reset the thing, this little filter icon is the clear filter option. I click that, and boom, I'm back to square one. And so you see what this does, my layout, like I said, it has January in the rows. So I can choose January or just February with the timeline. And, just like Matthew's, I can quickly get at what period of time I want to look at this for. And then what I did was I subtotaled it. So at first, I went into what Matthew was showing you here. And I said, let me go back to the pivot table options. Notice when I select a different thing, like here I've selected the pivot table. Up here, you have different options. So now it's giving me pivot table tools, right? So now when I go to design, here's where initially I said don't show subtotals. But then I went into just January, which is the months here. And I went into this dialog, and this is what I mean about knowing the different places to access things. So over here in this one particular case, I said, let's do a custom filter. I want to do a sum. So this way I get a subtotal by month. And that's all I want. And I did them at the bottom. So the January sum is right here. So now Greg can look, and he can see his grand totals for his workers' comp expense, the total pay, the workers' comp rate here. Obviously, you take the total hours times the pay rate to get the total pay. You take the workers' comp rate times the total pay to get the total workers' comp expense, right?
Seth, is there a way to exclude, obviously the sum of the pay rate is not valid?
No, that's the point. So you missed that. This is not showing you the sum. It's showing you the average pay rate.
In the summary at the January.
Oh, no, it's going to just sum up whatever. You can't just say only sum these columns. Either you're summing the columns or you're not. So you could put a little footnote somewhere that says ignore the sum on the pay rate.
Well, then why did it give you, why doesn't it have a total?
I see what you're saying.
I didn't hear the question, actually. But over here.
Why does it not have a total at the bottom of the WC rate column?
Because I chose, because the WC rate is not a value. It's actually in the rows. It's laid out differently.
Okay.
That's exactly why, which is a good point. I can put the pay rate down here, and boom. So rate of pay.
There you go.
And
See, that's the cool thing with this is literally it does take time to play around with it. But think about if you had to try to manipulate data in Excel and you wanted to make a simple change like that, man, you'd be going in, copying a whole column, trying to move it over, trying to add a formula to add it and sum it all together. But very quickly it's switched around and new information.
But let's test this. I want to see if the rate of pay is now giving me the right data. Because if I take 16 here times the hours of 108.25, I get my 1732. Okay, so it is taking, it's not like adding up the pay rates. So that's, yeah. So that's perfect. And yes, thank you for mentioning that, Matthew. This just perfectly highlighted the whole point of doing this. Because in 1 second, Greg raised an issue, and in 1 second, I was able to fix it. So that now the data is presented in a way that makes a lot more sense.
So Seth, real quickly, can you do me a favor and can you grab from the very top corner of your pivot table, so the top left, and highlight all the way to the bottom right corner of the actual pivot table?
All right, so I'll start here at the very top. By the way, notice I also froze the panes on mine so you can always see the headers.
Nicely done.
By the way, Sarah Laidlaw has some crazy funky numbers in hers. I checked the source data, so it wasn't something screwy with the pivot table. It was something screwy with the actual data.
Yeah. So basically what I'm doing real quick here, go ahead and can do a control copy, of course, with this real quick.
Oh, so yeah, you can just paste this without it being an actual pivot table, right?
Exactly. So if you paste values is the key thing to it. What you've done is you've just provided a new table of data structured just the way you want.
It's like creating a report out of the pivot table that will be static. It won't change.
That comes into play, especially if you're doing rebuilds of data. Sometimes it's a great way if you want to take like a full vendor list and you want to export from your general ledger, you could in a sense take your whole vendor list, do a next column over that shows each of the different accounts or categories that are being used, and trying, from that point, flatten it out, copy, paste it to a new page, and you've created a new table that you can then use with this pivot table to pivot a pivot table.
Right. By the way, one other thing I wanted to show.
What? Totally lost me.
I know. I kind of did that on purpose, but what it is sometimes, have you ever read, you'll find that sometimes when you run a pivot table, you'll see something, you'll be like, oh, wait, but what if I could take it and then compare it to this, but it's in that data there, right? Mm-hmm. So you can actually create more pivot tables. Let's see if I remember how to do that. I think it's through
the other thing you can do very simply is I can take my tab here, which is Seth's pivot suggestion, and just make a copy of the tab. Control click, drag to the right is, by the way, a fast way to make a duplicate of a tab. So now I've made an exact duplicate of the pivot table with the same exact source data, so I can manipulate one way and the other another way. And I do that a lot, and I just rename the tabs based on, I think of each of these as another report. So I'll rename the tabs appropriately based on what information I'm trying to display, differently from the other.
Wow.
Another thing, by the way, that I want to make sure everybody understands how this works is, notice how mine is formatted nicely. It's got the pretty colors, right? So under Pivot Table Tools, which only shows up here at the top while the pivot table is selected, you have design options where in a click, you can change the way it looks. You can do real simple, scaled back, right? Or you can do like I did here. Now I forgot which one I did, but I think it was something like this, right, with a different color scheme. But same idea. So very quickly, you can change the design. And of course, you can customize your own design, but I always like to just stick with the standards just because that's not something I want to spend a whole lot of time on. Also, while you're working in here and while I've got it selected, notice whenever I select the pivot table fields dialog to my right just pops in automatically, which is great because oftentimes when I click on it, it means I want to work with it and I need access to this, but sometimes it's just getting in the way. So you can X that out, and if you need it back, just go back to Analyze, and all the way at the top right is the field list.
Now, also, sometimes you're seeing data there, but maybe you've got some bad information. Like, well, wait a second, where's that coming from? Seth, would you pick any value in total pay and double click on the number, please?
Yeah, so and what Matthew's asking me to show you, I'll just explain first real quick. Just like you can drill down on a number in a QuickBooks report, you can do that here. So if I want to analyze Brian Gannon's hours, I can double click the hours, and it gives me a drill down in a table form of exactly what information it's got. Remember, this was just in January, right? And then it's got all the information. Here's the different transaction dates, right? The reference name is hours. Over here is, there's 2 hours columns. The ones I figured out we were working with was the second one, hours 2. And I realized what you did there, Greg, which is pretty clever, because here, wherever the source was coming from, you had hours and minutes broken up. So this kind of combined them and converted the minutes into a function of 60, or base of 60, rather.
Right.
So that was pretty clever. And then here's all the other stuff, the rate of pay.
If we need to edit that data, so if you drilled into Sarah's, where we
You
saw
can't edit the data in the drill down. If you need to edit the data, you go back to the source, and you can use filters to chisel it quickly. So if I know I want to edit some of Brian's January data, I might do that drill down first just to get a clear picture of what's going on. Then I'd have to go to the raw data, and here I'm going to use my filters. So let's go back to the column that's got the names in it. And this is useful because now what we're doing is not so much pivot tables as much as we're learning how to work with tables and filters specifically. So I go into the employee reference name, and I can just, the list is short enough that I could manually select, but in case it wasn't, I can just type Brian in the search, and it quickly pulls up Brian. And then I go back to my transaction date, and I only want January. And again, this goes back to what Matthew's saying earlier. This is why it's so important to get the dates formatted and read properly, because that allows me to do things like this. Now I've got essentially the same report as the drill down, but within the actual source data. So if I want to edit something here, I can edit it. And so let's just change his hours, right? Let's give him, this is coming by form.
12.
What?
Just give him 712 hours. All
right, just something like ridiculous, right? So 712 hours. Now I'm going to go back to my pivot table, and you won't see any difference yet. The pivot table is kind of cool in that way. If I want to see if I want this to reflect that change, I come over here to Analyze, and I click Refresh.
I got stuck on that so hard.
You can also right-click anywhere inside the table and go to Refresh as well.
Yeah.
I looked for that and I couldn't find it, but
yep,
it was also 4 o'clock in the morning. So
now, Seth, a pivot table would be nowhere near as much fun without a pivot chart, right?
Absolutely. Do you have one ready? Because I didn't do one.
Actually, you go ahead. Yours is so beautiful. We'll kind of walk you through it.
All right, hold on a second, because I want to just quickly check our Facebook live feed and see if there's any comments or questions or.
Matthew, you just said that his information was really beautiful. Does that mean you're going to vote for Team Seth?
I already did. And I am adult enough to know when hat goes off to you, Seth.
No way. I agree with Linda. It's a tie. We both win.
The real winners are everybody we care
We're
about.
all the winners here.
I think I'm the big winner here because
you got all this help for free.
Yep.
Well, that brings up something we want to sort of give you all as kind of an offer at the end of this. So like I said earlier, stick around for another 10 minutes, and we're going to offer you an opportunity where Matthew and I will tag team and help you specifically with your own data. We'll help you build your own pivot table. I'm not going to lie, we're going to charge for it, but I think you'll find it's worth it to get our help specifically to drill into whatever data you need help with, so that we can help you do, as we've done here with Greg, and do it quickly. So first of all, the other thing we didn't do, which I'll do really quickly, is we didn't show everybody how to, I will share my screen. Thank you, Greg. We didn't show everybody how to kind of build this from scratch, right? We probably should do that, or at least give people a sense of what it looks like when you're starting out, because we kind of just started with the pivot tables we had already created, right? Now, keep in mind, in a few minutes, I'm not going to be able to get it to the level that you saw there, which is partly why we did it in advance, is because this can take a little time to build and get it and play with it and tweak it and, you know, make the mistakes and correct the mistakes until you get it exactly the way you want it. You know, I'm not going to lie, this isn't something you can do, especially when you're dealing with a detailed analysis like what Greg has given us to work with here. And thank you, Greg, because this was awesome. You know, because this really, it challenged me. I had to look and really understand the data that was in here and start thinking in terms of how to present it. Fortunately, in my case, Matthew had gone first and given me a copy, so I was able to cheat and look what he had done. And then I said, all right, how can I do this differently? It wasn't even, in my mind, a question of how can I improve upon it, because I think what Matthew did was beautiful, but I just said, how can I do something a little different just to show, you know, different ways of doing it. So the first
Real quickly, as you're going into this, a very important thing that everybody needs to know is more often than not, when you're creating your pivot tables, you will probably end up at some point in time adding on helper columns. In other words, you may add a couple extra columns in to have reference points the way you want it to be, such as the employee reference name. Like, that didn't necessarily have to be in there, but by adding it in, it's great.
Yeah.
So keep that in mind. Sometimes that'll come into play because you can still use formulas and such also.
Yeah, that's the beauty of this is exactly like Matthew said. You can, you know, you can create your own fields based on the data that's in here. And yeah, that I almost do every time is I'll add fields based on different formulas and things I want to be able to describe in the pivot table. And sometimes you can do it in the pivot table. You can even do calculated fields in a pivot table, but it's often going to be much easier to write the formula in the source data and then summarize it in the pivot table.
Be careful doing it in a pivot table because as your table pivots, it will change what you're getting.
Yep. So what I'm doing here is real quick, just kind of getting the raw data from QBO back to what it looks like as sort of truly raw data, right? So it might look.
Another thing that you might want to mention is that as you embark on this journey, you kind of have to begin with the end in mind.
Yes.
You have to have some idea of what you want this
to look like. Yep.
Look like, and so. While I'm seeing that what you guys did is grand, it doesn't sync up with the way that I need to present it. But I can see how I can tweak it. It's just a tweak. It's just moving a couple columns around and we're done.
Right. Okay, and we can look at that if we have time in a few minutes. But I want people to see how this gets created from the get-go, right? Because we started with a finished product and kind of walked you through how to sort of tweak it. But I'm sure you're wondering, okay, great, but how do I actually create this thing, right? So that's what I'm going to show you here. And so what I did was I actually sort of set this raw data back to its raw form, right?
That means it's not in a table. It's literally just a whole bunch of columns and rows with information.
Yes.
So now one of you added that column 1 there.
That was Matthew. And this is common to do in a database. It's sort of what we call it, in database language, we call it a key field, where it's got like a unique identifier so that each record has at least one piece of information that's unique to that record for sure.
Okay, just so we know that's what the ID should have done. But that's
I was going to say that the ID may have accomplished this, but a lot of times when we're getting data from somebody else, we don't want to count on that. Gotcha. And also, the reason I do this and the reason I do it sequentially, like Matthew's done, is I want to be able to resort it back to whatever original order it was in. Without question, because I don't know if it came in sorted with any actual logic behind that sorting, but this way I can quickly get it back to whatever it was before.
You should basically title it safety net because you can do whatever you want with the data and you go back to that sort A to Z and everything goes right back to the way it was set up.
Yeah, I usually call it my key, right? I call it the key. So, but yeah, just something like that. So anyway, the other thing I will often do before I touch this data, so I got this data out of QBO, this is the report, maybe I flattened it out. Remember at the very beginning I talked about the importance of a flat file. This is exactly what I meant by that, where I have columns and rows, period, right? And nothing in between. There's no like merged cells with pretty labels. It's just raw data. Now, what I will often do is I'll make a copy of this tab, so I pervert the data. So I preserve the data in its original form, and then I play with my copy. I'm not going to bother to do that here because not necessary in this case. But the first thing we're going to do is if I put my cell pointer anywhere in this range, or if you want to be safe, I'll start at A1, Control-Shift down, and Control-Shift right. Now I've got the entire range selected for sure. And this I learned from Matthew. Control-T is in table, brings up the create table dialog. And you confirm it's checked off. My table has headers. I click OK. And boom, I've got an instant table. And notice, just like with the pivot tables, we have design choices here. So I can make my table look nice and pretty, like Matthew had done.
Hey, I love my tables.
Yep. And now my headers, for whatever reason, came in dark, so I can highlight those headers and just change the font color to white. Makes it easier to read. And now I don't need to freeze the panes, because when I've created it as a table, notice as I scroll down, it moves my headers into where otherwise there would be the letter references indicating what column you're in.
That's interesting.
Which is a really cool feature of tables.
It also helps a lot with formulas, but that is for another episode.
Yeah, so when you're writing a formula, you can see exactly what you're referencing.
As you scroll to the right, does it keep the...
No.
No, if you want to keep something to the right, you would have to split the screen or freeze the panes.
But the other great thing is, show them how easy it is to then create the pivot table.
Right. So if I go over here to Design, I click right here that's where it says Summarize with Pivot Table. Okay, and I can name the pivot table, right? I'm just going to leave the defaults here, click OK. And now think of this as, remember when you would go into QuickBooks Desktop and you would do a custom transaction detail report. You're kind of starting with a blank, and now we're going to just fill in what goes where. So I usually like to start with my values, at least one value, right? So I want, let's say, where's my hours? Hours 2. I'll put that in. And it tells me sum of hours 2. Notice it's some crazy number. So right away, I'll just quickly format that.
Accounting.
I use the number format, but basically the same. All right, then I can do my rate of pay, which I think we decided needs to go into the rows, right? What we also wanted in the rows was the person.
Well, let's make it the way that I want it.
Okay, so you, yeah, but you had, Greg, in your description, I guess this is where I went a different way and figured Matthew had too, because you told us to use some weird field that when I put it in there, it had like test and some number. So that data didn't make sense to me, which is why I didn't sort of go that way. But walk me through what you want to do.
Well, that was just my attempt at scrubbing the data.
Okay. So what do you really want to see? Do you want to see like the employees in the columns?
The employees in the columns.
Okay.
The work comp class in the rows, and the payroll in the values.
So the total pay.
Yeah, total pay.
All right, and let's do value field settings. So did everybody see how easy that was? Just looking for the fields at the top, grabbing them, and putting them exactly where Greg asked me to. And so that is done in 2 seconds. Now, again, the reason I think Matthew and I also did what we did was when I looked at the workers' comp class, that doesn't really tell me a whole lot. I don't know what these numbers mean, which is why I think both of us were inclined to stick that other description that we have in here that kind of tells us more about what that class might mean.
So how close is this to what you need for reporting, Greg?
Oh, it's right on in there, and it's a matter of, first of all, the problem that I was having was the data is dirty, yep. As you saw with
dirty data.
Yeah, that negative 10 million hours or whatever it is, and so I've got to get that cleaned up, and then what else do I have to do? Break it out by months that aren't really months. So if somebody punches in on 7/24, for example, that doesn't get paid until 8/3, which would show up in August's. So maybe
you have check dates in there also is what
that's
you would
exactly
want.
what I was it just popped into my head that that's the solution.
You can also, when you're dealing with dates, if you go into the date area, you can actually right click and go to group when you have dates selected, and you can make your own custom grouping. So let's say you have your reporting period's like halfway through the month. You can actually choose a starting date of like the 15th and then choose you wanted to group it by every 7 days or 14 days for a pay period. You can do stuff like that as well with pivot tables.
You see what I did here? I added the dates into the top. It, by the way, automatically subgroups it by month. Then over here on the actual pivot table, if I click the drop down that's next to months, you can go to date filters and you can do a custom filter or do one of the standards. It's almost just like using the date drop down in a report in QuickBooks, where I can do a lot of the standards or I can do a custom filter. Or here it says all dates in the period, and I can choose to look at a specific quarter or a specific month.
And again, that only works if your dates are in good format and no spaces.
Right.
So if we went to value filters, that's what I was doing, because there was the
value filters is more about, it's not going to work on dates really, unless you could do that to do everything after a certain date or everything before.
Well, I was doing in between. So I would say anything between 6/23 and 7/22.
See, I would do that here.
Real quickly, because I know we're close on time, did anybody have any questions on this stuff before we run over, just to be safe?
I'm looking at the live feed here. Tammy comments in the Facebook live feed saying, apparently this pivot table subject matter was so powerful that it broke her internet connection.
I believe it. I believe it.
Linda says she wants a raise.
Sorry, Linda. It's not in the future.
Well, give her a 25% raise. What's 25% of zero?
Some would say QBO. Nerd humor.
Very funny. Kids today. All right, so no questions? That's it?
Was it informative and helpful? And I'm sure everybody's going to go back and slowly watch it, right?
Well, what's the offer?
So here's the offer. The offer is Matthew and I are willing to do a deep drilled down webinar for you. But this time you have to come with your own pivot table. You have to come with a project for us to work on, right? You'll give it to us in advance, and we'll come into the webinar, just like we did today for Greg, prepared for any of you to cut up your data and help you. So you can come in live with us and say, just like we just did, especially at the end with Greg, where Greg finally said, okay, what you guys did was beautiful, but not exactly what I wanted. Here's what I really want. And in 30 seconds, I was able to cut it up exactly the way Greg wanted, right? So we want to do that for you in a webinar. And we want to charge for it. So I've got the product already set up in my shopping cart. So if you're interested, let me know. But I will also post the link to the product so you can sign up, and we will schedule the date with you so that we can help you kind of 2-on-1 and get this done.
Most important, doing the process that way, we'll want it to be where we both everybody has the data so you can follow along, because you need to click the buttons and do it will be a great way to actually gain the best value out of it also.
Right. So we'll probably have you Matthew and I will play with it ahead of time to have our own ideas, but then once we're online with you, we'll have you share your screen and we'll have you build it. We'll coach you on how to build it yourself.
So, cool.
All right, so that's the offer, is we're going to offer to help you kind of 2-on-1 with your own project. So if you have a cleanup job you're doing or just something where you're dealing with a lot of data and want a quick way to cut it up using what you've seen here today, we will help you, like I said, 2-on-1. Pivot tables gone wild.
Invaluable to me.
Linda, thank you for the bow tie.
That's a nice bow tie.
Actually, Heather Satterley, thank you for the bow tie.
It matches your background.
Oh, God, duh, green screen.
That's funny.
I've been wondering, how come the QuickBooks isn't showing up? That's
all right, so let us know if you want to do this. I'll send you the link so you can make your payment, and then Matthew and I will schedule the hour with you so that we can go through it.
So Seth, can I ask you a favor?
Yes.
This is one of the live shows that you really want to watch again.
Mm-hmm.
We'll have it on Facebook and we can save it. But can you post it again for us, please?
Every one of these gets posted on my website every single week, always on Saturday. That's one of the few things I'm pretty consistent about. I'll show you exactly where to go to find them so that there's no question about where to go to find them. So if I bring up my website, if you go to podcasts and go to Zoom In with Seth David, this is where every single one gets posted. You'll even see last week's was posted last Saturday. I actually backdate them so that they're dated according to the Friday in which they were done. But so here was last week's. So tomorrow, for sure, I will get this uploaded and live at some point during the day. So for sure, by first thing Sunday, it will be here, usually a lot sooner, although tomorrow I'm teaching at Santa Monica College. So tomorrow it may actually not happen until later in the day.
Thank you, dear.
You're welcome.
We get to see you later today, right, Gina?
Absolutely.
Sweet.
Yes,
So,
you do. Tell us about it, Gina.
Well, today I want to talk a little bit about, I tried to use YouTube and the premieres and the watch party all at the same time. And I think I figured out how to do it. Matt's eyes just brightened.
I like it.
We'll talk about that.
Very cool.
So see you all this afternoon.
See you all later.
Have a wonderful day and a very successful week, everybody.
Bye,
Thanks so much,
everyone.
guys.